Hello, everyone. Okay, so we are going to do something a little different this week. This is the first time that I've actually made a recording over a PowerPoint, so we're going to give it our best shot. Okay, so this week we are going to dive into ethical issues, and this is one of those elements of our class where, if you haven't already, you are going to have an entire class that is just focused on ethics, okay? Ethics and counseling. So, when we have this portion of this class with child and adolescent counseling, um, we're going to be hitting a lot of topics kind of more on the surface, but this is one that I want to go in depth a little bit more. On because I know that a lot of you are really interested in this portion of it. And this is probably one of the biggest differences, I would say, between counseling adults and then counseling children and adolescents is just the ethical components and what it means to actually provide therapy for these minor populations, and then how you go about developing relationships with parents and with the actual client, the child client, in an ethical and legal way. Okay, so I figured it would be better for me to create a separate slideshow, kind of compiling all of this information from the lens of a counselor who actually counsels children and adolescents. So we are going to walk through how to build a parent connection, establishing that working relationship. I know a lot of you are really interested and maybe nervous about counseling children and adolescents because of the added factor of parents. We're going to actually go through some initial intake and informed consent procedures for children, and then initial intake and informed consent procedures for adolescents. Um, Throughout now, I will interchange the word adolescent and teen. Um, I use both for the same population, and I'll show you kind of where I break down the difference between a child and an adolescent here in a minute. We're going to talk about some common fears of counselors, and then we will talk about multicultural considerations. Okay, so after we get through this, you should have everything you need in order to complete exercise 2. And we'll talk about that more. I have some resources that I've placed in Blackboard. Um, I've put it in a separate folder that says, materials in order to complete exercise 2. You may not utilize all of that to actually complete it. That's some of the extra materials I talked about in our first video, that I might flood you with things that you might want to save and refer back to later. But I don't know, it just kind of depends on what you're interested in and what you might find helpful in that folder. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to try to make this as entertaining and as realistic as possible. So, something that I appreciated from my master's program was, how does this relate? How does this actually connect? How is this going to help me be a counselor in the future? And so that is kind of what I've tried to do, is make this slideshow as helpful as possible. And I will toss in some examples and some stories in here of things that I've experienced in counseling in this population. Okay, so we're gonna just get started, and I will not try to get on a soapbox about anything and make this super long. So we'll try to hit the highlights, hit the good parts. So that parent connection, okay, parent connection is huge when you are counseling children and adolescents. And if you were to ask and poll existing therapists about why they do or do not counsel anyone under the age of 18, you are most likely going to hear it's the parents. So, parents are a big factor. I have a therapist in our practice that always says, "Oh my goodness, I would counsel all the children and adolescents of the world if it weren't for the parents." And that is that person's perspective, and I don't say that to be bleak as much as I say that to say, it can be complicated. It can be it's just an additional work. It's additional training. It's additional skills, and we'll get into why that is. It is ongoing throughout treatment. Okay, so you are never going to reach a point, I don't think, in the parent relationship where you've achieved total connection, total trust, total freedom, because that's just not realistic. You're going to have to connect with the parent throughout the entire process that you are involved with treating their child. Okay, so one of my favorite ways to look at this, and just this is one of my quotes that I use in training our therapists in our clinic, is you have to have buy in from the person responsible for transporting the child to and from your office. Okay, so you've got to get the parent on board with why is this going to benefit first my child, but why ultimately is that going to benefit me and what we're experiencing. And that's not to say that every parent that you're going to encounter is going to be that narrow minded. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying you have to think about this. Um, you know, if a child or a teen is going to come to therapy, well, most of the time they're in school from the majority of the day. And if you are seeking counseling outside of the school setting, so for those of you who are not on the school counseling track right now, I'm talking about you folks, they are either going to have to prioritize their child missing school to come and see you. That would entail them potentially leaving work to go and get their child and check them out of school to bring them to you. So that's a lot. That's a big sacrifice on the part of the parent to try to work out those logistics if they're going to see someone outside of the school system during school hours. Okay. Well, then you say, okay, Dr. Scott, well, that's okay. I'm going to see clients until 6 o'clock at night so they can come after school. Okay. Well, while that is a lot easier, you also have to consider what if they want their child to play sports? What if their child has other extracurricular activities? Where does that fit into their family schedule? What if they have a sibling who is involved in some after school activity? Or what if their child is struggling academically and they're in tutoring? So you just have to kind of, I think one of the biggest things to think about when you're getting that buy in from the parent is just have a baseline respect for the fact that they have to create space and time in all of their schedules to make this work for the child. So, if you are a school counselor, if you are going to be working in the schools, you have to have buy in from the person that is going to carry these things over in their day to day life. Even though you might be seeing the child during school, and that might help because it's like one less barrier to treatment, right? That they're already at school, you're already able to see them. It's a lot easier on the parent. Maybe some of those things don't exist because you're able to take care of it while they're, a captive audience, so to speak. They've got to be at school. While that's the case, I think it's almost there isn't enough of a buy-in, so the parent isn't really involved in any interactions that you're wanting to implement long term. So just keep that in mind when you are initially connecting with parents that this is something that impacts them too on every level. And sometimes I think we have to create that picture for them of, hey, I know that this is a sacrifice for you. It might financially be a sacrifice for them. If they have a copay with their insurance, if they don't have insurance and they have to pay out of pocket, this is a financial commitment that they are making. Again, if it's an out of school setting. Okay, so when I meet parents on any level, these are kind of some questions that I have in the back of my head, and I may ask them directly some of these things, but this is kind of where I start. So I want to know what their thoughts and feelings are towards this. And you're going to see a list of this at the bottom of what I mean by that. But I have a lot of this moments. What are your thoughts towards counseling? What are your thoughts towards mental health in general? Have you been to therapy before? Have y'all tried therapy before for your child? What do y'all think that your child needs? What do you think that you need in this? But those are kind of the two areas that I like to start with. And parents are going to come in, especially because they're focused on their child. They are going to want to um, let you know every single thing they possibly can about their child right out the gate. Okay. So a lot of times if parents come in and they're like, well, let me tell you about, um, little Johnny and what they're doing and why we're here and why we were sent to see you. That is great and that is all helpful to a certain extent, but I like to slow that down and say, okay, well, we're definitely going to get there. I definitely am interested to hear in all of those details, but I'm just curious, like, What were your thoughts and feelings coming in here today? Are you, and I don't always give them options. I'll usually, excuse me, leave that open ended. But what I will like to do is, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Okay, please ignore my little glitch. I thought that I had been talking this entire time and it was not recording me. So if you heard me say, oh, you gotta be kidding me, that's because I'm 100% not technology savvy. So let me get back to my train of thought as my dog is walking into the room. So this is about to be really interesting. So what I like to say again is that, all right, we're going to try this again. So what I like to ask them is, what are your thoughts and feelings towards this? And what I'm waiting to hear are, man, I was actually really nervous about coming in here today. I don't really know what to expect from this. I don't know that this is going to help. I also might be waiting to hear. I'm excited. I think this could really be helpful to us. I'm skeptical. I want this to work. But I don't know. I don't know how bringing Johnny to come and see you every week is going to help us with his attitude towards me. I mean, am I going to be in the room? How are you going to help us with how he talks to us? Like, I don't understand how that's going to work. So, in those questions, you're able to assess kind of just the emotional state of the parent and what they view therapy to be. And that gives you an opportunity to then educate. Okay. So, a lot of the parent connection is giving them facts and educating them on what you will and what you will not do in this setting. Okay. And a lot of those answers to those questions are going to be shaped by your theory. And you will hear me say that several times throughout this. And that's not me dodging how I handle those situations. I want to be really mindful of the way that I practice and my theoretical viewpoint, and not train you guys or impress upon you, this is the way to do it, this is the only way to do it. Because it's not. Using my theory, I counsel children under the age of 12 using uh, play therapy, child centered play therapy. And so, in that model, there are a lot of ways and a lot of tips and a lot of tools about how you can connect with parents and let them understand the process. And, hey, this is how a session is going to go. This is how what to expect when you bring the child. All those types of things are shaped by your theory. If you do not follow something that is like, and child-centered play therapy is not structured by any means, but I'm saying it's actually like a framework. So there's a lot of things that go into it. If you are someone whose theoretical orientation is not going to be something that lends itself to a lot of structure on helping you understand how you handle these things, you're going to have to come up with some of those answers for yourself, that you're able to give parents. And I would highly suggest that you have some type of theoretical framework, because it is going to help shape how you view yourself. This topics. How's the relationship between me and you supposed to be? As the counselor, what do you think my relationship's going to be with your child? That's a lot of trust, guys. Let me tell you, that is a lot of trust to let some adult that you have no idea really who they are, other than you just blindly trust their credentials that they're a vetted therapist. You're letting them go into a closed room with their child at whatever age they are for 45 minutes to potentially an hour once a week for a while. And that is a lot of trust. And so, helping them understand this is the relationship that I'm going to have with your child. This is the relationship that I'm going to have with you. How is this going to impact and how is this going to work any relationship between co parents? If you have a child and they are a child of divorce, what is this going to mean for me and my ex husband or my ex wife or my ex partner? What does that mean for us in order for this child to be engaged in therapy with you? And then ultimately, how is this going to work? What are your expectations about how this is going to work in the relationship between you and your child? All of those things are really, really important to address in whatever theoretical framework you choose to. But that is the best way, I think, to establish working with a parent, is just to figure out where they're coming from. In that parent connection, I let the parent be the parent. I want them to relax. So even as they're telling me, you know, Johnny's been punching all of his kids at school, and they've said that he has to do therapy or he cannot come back and be in a traditional classroom. I will say, hey, I want you to be the parent in this. I don't want you to be the teacher. I don't want you to feel like you have to be the counselor. I don't want you to feel like you have to be, um, the mediator in all of this. I want you to be the parent. I want you to tell me things about your kid that nobody else can tell me. I want you to give me insight on things behind the scenes that nobody else in the situation can help us understand. I especially give parents this speech if, when they come to see me, there is known abuse or sexual assault. If I know that there is known sexual abuse and it's not on the part of the parent, right? So if they're, oh my gosh, we found out a month ago that her cousin has been molesting her, for the past 2 years, and this is like a devastation thing. I will immediately tell the parent, hey, I cannot imagine all of the thoughts and feelings that are going on in your head. And in this, what I want you to do is I want you to be the parent. I don't want you to be the investigator. I don't want you to be um, the doctor. I don't want you to be the counselor. I don't want you to be the friend to your child. I don't want you to be the savior of your child. I want you to be the parent, because being the parent is enough. Being the parent of your child is enough to create change and to create stability that we need for children and adolescents. As you will keep reading in The Deepest Well, you will see that some of the biggest healing aspects of, um, you know, trauma, essentially, and all of those ACEs factors is loving environments, deep relationships, deep connection. And so, who better than the parent to facilitate some of that safety? Okay. Um, I will, now that I've kind of let y'all know where I differentiate ages here, ages 0 to 11 for me is where I say children. And in the intake session, I put this picture here because I think it's kind of a misunderstanding that, okay, first session, bring your child, let's get started, let's have a go. That is not how I practice. And on this next slide, I'm going to give you some tips and some statements about how I practice. And again, this is what I do, and I'm not trying to create an army of mini Dr. Scotts. And so, this is just kind of an example of how I handle that intake and informed consent. So, I do not allow children to be present at all for this first session. I ask all parents and guardians to be present if possible, especially in their if they're a blended family, especially if in their custody agreement they have joint custody. Okay, I really want whatever adults, whatever parental figures are involved in this kid's life, I want them there at that first session without the child. Okay, and sometimes I get pushback for this. This is something that my front desk administration, when they book a new client with me, and it's a child that's 11 or under, they will say this, hey, for this first session, it's just going to be parents only. Please, as many parents and guardians that are involved in this child's life, they could be present if possible. If that's not the case, maybe the other parent needs to provide childcare so that child can't come. Then I say, whoever you think is the primary parent, I would like you to attend. And that's a loaded question and a loaded phrase. I recognize primary parent, but I leave that to the parent. And then if in that intake, if only one parent shows up and the details of that make me feel like I really need to have a conversation with the other one, I will schedule a second parent intake and do that at another time before I will see the child. So it's really important for me, before I ever introduce myself and be present with this child, that I have a global understanding of the system that they live in when it comes to parents. I also require that I have a copy of a custody agreement on file. This is in their intake paperwork. They know they're supposed to provide it to me. But custody agreements, oh my goodness. Talk about something that can be so different and so nuanced depending on so many things. So in the state of Mississippi, you might see custody where it says this parent has legal rights but not medical rights, or this parent has medical and academic rights, but they don't have full custody. there's so many different versions of what custody can mean. And also, I cannot tell y'all how many times that I've pulled a copy of a custody agreement with a parent on intake. And what the parent describes to me is not actually what is the language that is written in the custody agreement. Not because anybody was intentionally violating their custody agreement. They literally did not understand that it actually said that. So, and then in that instance, it might have been something like, mother has primary residence, mother has primary medical consent, mother has primary academic consent, and then it said, father has visitation, and father has partial medical custody. Well, partial medical custody usually means they do not have to consent to treatment, but they are equally allowed to retain any records or anything like that. And it's important to me to clarify those custody agreements with the parents and the guardians because there are so many different nuanced situations. In that one situation that I'm referring to, the father was incarcerated and had not victimized their child, but was a perpetrator and abusing other children. And so, because of that, the court was really trying to limit their scope and interaction of what that male parent could have knowledge of their child, and especially of the treatment that they were receiving, because they were still trying to suss out if that child had been abused by their father. And so it was really important once I read that, I said to the mom, hey, actually, you might want to speak to your attorney about this because I hear you telling me that if he reaches out in any capacity to obtain information about your child being in therapy with me, I hear you saying that you don't want that to be released to him, but that's not what your custody agreement actually endorses. So that's just a little example about how you kind of stay out of hot water, and it gives you more confidence. It gives you more confidence to move fully forward, knowing that you've done your due diligence. Okay. Now, I've also had a situation where I had a copy of the custody agreement unknowing to me through the summer. The child took a little break. I didn't see them for a while. Both parents decided to go back to court and alter their custody agreement, and nobody ever told me that until way later. And it came up. They were like, "Oh, yeah, we changed this. You probably should have a copy of the new one." It didn't really mean anything in that situation, but let's say that something had happened, and maybe I had released documentation that later had been changed. I'm just trying to think of a what if scenario. If you're ever called into question, you can then at least prove, hey, I got a copy of the most recent custody agreement on file at that time. And then in informed consent, we let parents know if you ever make any changes to this, it's your burden to make sure that I have the most current copy. So that kind of gives you like that multiple layer of protection. I require that they complete intake paperwork before they come and see me. My intake paperwork is thick. It's like 22 pages if you print it out on a copier. And I want them to have time to sit and fill that out. And I want to have time to digest that before I ever walk into that session so that I can go ahead and make mental notes, mental highlights of things that I want to ask about. These are usually 60-minute sessions. If I know up front that there's legal involved, if I know up front that there's sexual abuse involved, if I know up front anything like that, I could potentially book a 90-minute session just to give that parent a full time to break down, because they will have their own therapy session encased in an intake, and that's okay. That's appropriate for the first time. And always, 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 feel like if you experience one of those things where you're kind of fighting a war on two fronts, in the sense that the parent is going through a deeply intimate mental health crisis, as well as the child, you can only be there for the child. You cannot, unless you're a family systems counselor, which props to you guys, unless you are trained to handle the whole family, your client is the child. And so I cannot tell you how many times I've pulled the parent aside in a parent consult and just said, hey, or even at the end of an intake, hey, this feels really heavy for you. And I think it would actually really benefit your child if we found somebody for you to talk some of these things out with. And maybe it won't be for as long as I see your child, as far as how many sessions, but I think it could be really beneficial for you to sit with somebody who's focused on you and trying to process this. So always, always, always feel like you can rely on referrals to other colleagues, if you feel like the parent, and usually the parent does, need their own support. It just depends on how approachable they are to that idea, or how likely they are to actually want to do that. And then this last thing, this is the one thing that I'll share with you from one of my theoretical orientations and areas that I'm trained on. This focus on the donut, not the whole, is a line that is from um, child parent relationship therapy, which is essentially like an offshoot of child centered play therapy. And this is a statement that I really, really love because Gary Landreth, who created child parent relationship therapy, this is a conversation that he has with parents of, when you have a donut, what do you usually see about the donut? You realize there's a hole in the middle. Well, that's not what we're going to do when we focus on your child. We don't want to look at the things that your child lacks. We want to look at the donut. We want to look at what your child does have. So instead of coming in and just highlighting the problem, the problem, the problem, the problem, the problem, the thing that I like to end the session with is, okay, we've talked a lot about your concerns about Johnny. We've talked about a lot of the behaviors that he's not doing, a lot of the things that you want to change. What are some things that you love about your child? What are some things about his personality that you don't want to change? What are some things about the way that he exists in the world that, make you smile or make you laugh, or that you hope never changes about Johnny? What are some areas that he used to be that maybe he's not right now, because maybe you see a sadness or a heaviness or an anger in him that you haven't seen before? What are some of those things? And I actually have I have like I have two things. I have a handout that's like a coloring page, and it's a giant donut with sprinkles. And then I also have like a huge squishy donut pillow that I like to keep in my office. And so I'll even like pull either one of those out, and I'll be like, okay, so what are the sprinkles of your kid? Let's talk about the joy. Let's talk about the fun things, and the goals that you have for your child to maintain his hobbies and his strengths. So that's kind of how I like to highlight that with parents as well. In my intake session, these are some of the questions that I'll ask, especially that are specific when I have a child that's 0 to 11. I want to know if there was any substance use during pregnancy. I want to know the type of delivery, if there was a C-section, or if there were any complications, full term, premature, child's birth weight, any problems at birth, approximate age when child walked alone, approximate age when child was relatively potty trained, did your child cry excessively? So all of these questions are helping me get a bigger picture of how did this child enter this world? Developmental milestones. If you haven't had lifespan development yet, or if you haven't had anything about the lifespan, you will. That's a whole nother class that you'll have where you understand some of these milestones that are appropriate. Did your child cry excessively? Was your baby colicky? Did he cry a lot? That's giving me starting to give me a picture of maybe some child and parent attachment there. Oh my goodness, yes, my child cried so much and we got no sleep, and he's a horrible sleeper, and I can't. There comes a certain time of the day, and I can't be around him anymore. I can't stand it. Okay, well that's telling me a lot about the history of their attachment. So again, I take these things with a grain of salt. Like, it's helpful to a certain extent. I do not diagnose anything based off of these questions. This is just an initial picture. I like to use the example, and I know that now this is a much older movie, and I hope that y'all were still exposed to the Wizard of Oz as children, and if not, I'm going to feel really sad. The Wizard of Oz is a movie that my husband did not see until he met me, and I just feel like that is a critical shame. But so if I use this example and it goes over your head, just don't tell me. It's going to make me sad. But I like to tell people these questions for me, it's like in the Wizard of Oz at the beginning when Dorothy, everything is in black and white, and then she gets to Oz and to Munchkinland, and she opens the door and everything is in color. That is what I like to say, these intake questions. These intake questions are adding color to a black and white scenario. They are helping me get a better picture of what's going on. Nothing really changes, except everything changes, right? If you see something in black and white and then you see it in color, things just become so much more vivid and clear, and they stand out really differently. Any major illnesses or hospitalizations, that is major as far as any medical anxiety that the child might have. Has the child experienced any of the following, or do they suspect any of these things? So out of home care, that would mean like foster care, or Yeah, they're raised by their grandmother for a while, until we got, until the mom got on her feet. Any of that disruption of bonding, depression of mother. I like to ask a little bit about postpartum stuff with mom. Again, that helps me understand a little bit more about attachment, any verbal, physical, or again, sexual abuse, neglect, chronic pain, parental stress, a significant traumatic event, and then witnessing domestic violence. And then I keep going on with drug and alcohol use of family members. Are they adopted or fostered? There's this term that I think is dated, and I don't know. I don't know what the new preferred phrase is, but sometimes on forums you'll see, is the child natural, and that just means, is it like, did you give birth to this child? And I don't know, I don't like that term natural, because that makes them sound like, no, my child's an alien. So I don't know. So I'm trying to rephrase that. I even think on some of my old intake forms it says natural. So if that's on the sample that I give you, I apologize. I don't really like that. I don't really like that term. And then any names and ages of the child's siblings. And I just like to get a brief overview. Like, do they like their siblings? Do they get along relatively? Um, Also, again, current relationship status of the parents of the child, any comments about custody agreements, what the parents do for their job, who cares for the child? Do they go to daycare? Do they go to school? Who are the primary adults that these kids are with? And then any other significant people in the child's life that do not live with them. I ask about sleep, any physical symptoms they see in their kid. Nausea and vomiting in elementary kids is the number one indicator of anxiety. Okay. So if they say, "Oh my goodness, like we don't understand it. We've been trying to get down to the bottom of it. We think they might have a gluten intolerance. We think they might have an allergy. They throw up every morning before we go to school." To me, that's a red flag to suss out some anxiety. Concerning emotional changes or symptoms, yeah, my 6-year-old is depressed. Um, that there's no other word for it, right? Like, I can see that she is physically depressed. She's not interested in participating in anything. Who, what school they go to, what grade they're in, and what teacher do they have. I also like to ask, and I will ask this in an intake, like actual ask it. I will not put it in the forms. What is your relationship to the child teacher? Is it a positive interaction? Do you feel supported by them? Are you here because of them? Have they highlighted some things that you haven't seen before? That also kind of gives me a little bit of an indicator. It kind of makes me peel back the curtain a little bit of potentially um, how they might expect to interact with me, positively or negatively. That'll help me realize kind of how I need to bond with the parent, so to speak. And then, has the child ever repeated any grade, any IEPs that they have at the school? Um, have they ever done, or are they doing speech or occupational or physical therapy? Something that's interesting to know, and I didn't know this until until I had my child, but there is a big link between speech therapy and children that need tubes. And Penny had horrible, oh my goodness, she had horrible ear infections. And she was probably a little bit over a year when we started noticing how bad they were. And, every 15-month-old ish is babbling and talking and trying to make sense of their world. And you heard my dog growl earlier, and I apologize for that. So we have a dog, and his name is Chewy, and she kept calling him like Tui, and we just thought it was so cute. Like, oh my goodness, Tui, Tui, Tui. And then she had her tubes, and I swear to you, that day when she came home, she was like, "Hi, Chewy," and we were like, "What in the world?" And her surgeon told us after the fact her hearing was so bad that she was like, it was affecting her speech. So of course I like had my mom breakdown moment about it, like, "Oh my gosh, you haven't been hearing us." But for that reason, a lot of kids that they have a delay in realizing that they need tubes, is that they will have speech problems. So that question of, did they have any surgeries or any hospital stays, that could be relevant for you to be able to piece that together. Any academic problems or successes? Is your kid a genius? Have they already said he's in first grade, but he's reading at a fourth grade level? Things like that, because as we know, highly intellectual children that are younger might have social issues. They might have a hard time connecting on a social level. Again, all of this just creating that bigger picture. What reinforcements and disciplines do you use with your children? Do they spank? Do they not believe in spanking? Do they believe in, oh, what is the new trend? Gentle parenting. Are they a gentle parent? All those types of things. And then again, like I said, focusing on the donut and not the hole. What are your child's strengths and hobbies? So that's just kind of an overview of questions that I assess for. I know that it's a lot, but it will help you kind of zone in on areas maybe that you need to be aware of. Now, I recognize that informed consent is for outpatient mental health counselor. That is probably not something that you will do in the schools as a school based therapist. But I would highly, highly, highly suggest if you are going to be a school based therapist, create some type of intake. And you don't have to call it an intake, but create some type of, parent questionnaire or something that you're able to send home with the parent, or maybe at the times that you are able to meet with them at school where the parents are there. This is maybe it's a getting to know you packet. Hey, I want you to get to know me. I want to get to know you and your child. Something like that. You've got to find a way to assess for all these areas so that you're able to kind of figure out what's going on in areas for you to pay attention to. The other things that I'll make sure that I cover in our informed consent, of course, you're going to cover HIPAA and then FERPA if you're in a school environment. So that protection of confidentiality outside of the counseling relationship, having them consent to treatment, making sure they know that, any fees that you have of treatment, like I have a $35 paperwork fee that if they want me to fill out anything that the school's requested, I have that. And then I also have my court fees listed if they want to call me to court, which we'll talk about that later. And then any assessment fees, like let's say that they're trying to get diagnosed for ADHD and the pediatrician has sent paperwork to a teacher, to myself as a counselor. That is more considered, instead of that being a paperwork, I consider that a full assessment because it's pretty in depth, and I like to outline those fees. Other things that you'll see in my informed consent is phone, text, email communication, and then also a social media policy that we have. It is real, and that social media policy, I especially include that for my teens. Do not find me on Instagram and DM me. Do not, do not, do not. And I don't have Snapchat for a lot of reasons, but that's also a large reason. Do not find me on any social media platform, please. And then I will show y'all my kind of child play therapy disclosure that I have included in there, and then also my blended families disclosure. So those handouts, those are listed in that folder in Blackboard. And I'm not going to read those to you guys. I want y'all to go in and read those for yourself and just see kind of how I put disclaimer statements in there about that interaction. Blended families are tough because there's so many different types of blended families. And again, that's where I will go back to that custody agreement. I will tell you, if there's a scenario where biological father has custody of biological child and there's a stepmom present, it is not uncommon for stepmom to be the one that's calling, making appointments, wanting to be in charge of documentation, because that's like how it comes down to a lot of gender roles, right, in marriage. And we started having an issue where we would have stepmoms that were kind of controlling, for lack of a better term, the health record. Like they were the one that were the primary contact. And so we have had to make a policy that we just can't have a step parent. Anybody that's not named in that custody agreement, we cannot have them be the holder, like the controller of that. They are certainly willing and able, and we want them to be involved in the therapeutic process. But when you've got stepmom that controls the account and biological mom who has joint custody, but biological mom is not the primary parent, and biological mom wants to call and make an appointment and they can't because stepmom owns the account, it gets messy. So I like to, again, that's another reason why in the intake I like to address right off the bat who's involved here, what level of involvement do y'all expect from each other, just to try to get ahead of a lot of that, because I'll tell y'all, Parents are the first people to blow up on the front desk about a misunderstanding. And so, as a way to try to get ahead of some of that, I try to field out some of those questions in that first meeting. The last thing that I'll do to close that initial intake session: how often am I going to meet with your child? How often am I going to meet with you? How are we going to handle communicating in between sessions? It is my absolute pet peeve, and not even pet peeve, but I was trained to do this and I can't stand it. When parents want to sidebar with you right before you go into session with their child, let's picture mom and Johnny walk into your clinic, and Johnny is just about to climb the walls, and she says, "Well, Johnny got in trouble today. I just want to let you know that he's suspended from school for the next 2 days, and we just do not know what to do with him." No, ma'am. I would not want that to happen. If I'm walking into a therapy session with my counselor and my husband is with me, I want my husband to be like, "Well, she pissed me off this morning. We got into a fight. She, didn't do this again, and I want you to go in there and talk to her about that." Like, I would, we would have some problems. I like to maintain that respect and that level of confidentiality for that child. And so I'll tell parents, "Hey, if there's an emergency that I need to know something that has changed significantly before I see your child before that session, email it to me. I will not discuss it with you when your child is present, but that will let me know what's going on, and I will follow up with you in an email after that session about a time that we can connect for a parent consult." I do 15-minute to 30-minute to 45-minute to hour-long phone consultations with parents in between sessions. I do not do it after every session. I will say to them, "Hey, your child, they're 6 years old. It's going to take them a few weeks just to get comfortable with me and coming into the playroom with me. For these first few weeks, nothing stellar is really happening other than just me building a relationship with them. And so I will meet with them for the next 4 sessions. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and schedule you for a 30-minute parent consult. And we can kind of loop up and you can update me if you've seen anything. If they've come home asking questions about, "Mom, why do I go see Miss Jana? Why do I go see her? Why do I go there? Why do I go that room with all the toys?" Things like that I'm able to address. You know, Johnny cries every time that I tell him we're coming to your office. That's helpful information for me to know. So I kind of tell them that ahead of time. I tell them what it will be like when you bring your child. "Hey, when you come in next time and y'all come, you'll check in at the front desk. Y'all will be in the waiting room. I will come out and I will introduce myself to your child, and I will show them back to the playroom. And if they choose not to go, then I might suggest, hey, is it okay if mom comes with us for the first few minutes? Or how about mom come with us and look at the playroom?" So I'll give them different scenarios of how we're going to get the child back there. And again, the age of the child is totally different based on this. And then just the temperament of the child. I've had a lot of kids. Kids are just more trusting initially. And especially if the parent says and has prepared them, "You're going to go in there, you're going to see Miss Jana for a little bit. I'm going to sit out here, I'm not going to leave." Then they might not have a problem going back into the playroom. Some kids will see toys at the end of the hallway and start taking off running, and it's no big thing. Other kids, their attachment style, they're really, really nervous and anxious to leave their parent. And so, because of that, we might have to work on the parent coming into the room and then going out and working on that as we go. And then, what happens if your child doesn't want to come? So, this is the other thing. Part of that, of the child, and again, this is from my theoretical lens, is that they get a choice. They do not have to do this. They get a choice. And parents hate that. Parents hate to hear that sometimes because they're like, no, you're going to go in there. We've paid for this. Mom took off work to bring you here. You're going to go in there with her. And it's just for 30 minutes. It's just for 45 minutes. I'm going to be right here. We don't do that. I will say, "Hey, they're not, let's try again. Let's try in a few days, come back," and I will not charge them for that session, by the way. So, with insurance, you have to have contact with the client for 17 minutes to be able to bill. And so I'm not going to charge if a child is coming in and part of their therapeutic process is that they don't want to come back there because they're scared. I'm not going to charge a full session for that. That's not fair. So I will go ahead and let the parent know that up front because ultimately that's a concern, right? And I'll say, "Hey, I get it. I recognize you may leave work. You may go pick up your child from school. You may bring them here. It might be an hour-long ordeal. You show up and they may not want to come back here. And this is how we're going to deal with it. And we're not going to punish them for that. And we're going to be accepting of that. In all of my years of practice, that has happened to me one time. That's happened to me one time, guys, okay? One time the child has not wanted to come back at all. And we've had to postpone their first appointment. So that just also kind of lets you know. And I tell parents that, hey, this has happened to me once. I'm not saying your kid will not be number two. But if that happens, this is how we're going to go about it. So that's how I like to wrap up 0 to 11. Um, Now we'll kind of keep moving on to how we handle teenagers. Okay, so this is a whole different beast, and it's so fun. I love my teens, but an intake session is completely different. So again, I'm going to tell you how I practice and what I do, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I require the teen to be present for the intake along with at least one parent or guardian. Okay, so this is a big difference for how I handle teens versus children. I don't want every single adult that's in their life to be there. That's overwhelming. And also, they probably don't get along on the same level with the teenager on each level. So I want the teen to be present for the intake with the parent that they're most comfortable with. And that's what I've trained our front desk to tell them when they book a session. Um, because the teenager is more developmentally capable of being involved in their own treatment. And this is where we kind of start to identify the difference between ethics and legality. So, legally, as in your book, kind of went into more depth about this, legally, they're not an adult and they don't have rights. But ethically, we want to try to still treat them as a client and give them all of those autonomy and individuality that we're able to within reason. Okay. I want a copy of any custody agreements, paperwork completed prior to the appointment. It's usually a 60-minute session. And then what's different is that in paperwork, I have a parent intake, and that is where parents will consent for me to treat them. I also have a teen intake, and that is for them to assent, to basically say, hey, I get it. I assent to being a part of this. So legally, they cannot consent, but they are able to say that they're still bought in. So that's just kind of a baseline way. And then you'll see in that folder again, I've given you a copy of that teen assent and the parent intake. I think I'll go back and make sure I've uploaded those. But you're able to see the language in that. I also like to do that for this reason. What the parent thinks is the problem, what the teen thinks is the problem, rarely matches up. Okay. And so because of that, I like to know from both sides of it, what do we have going on? Again, it helps me create that picture. So I chose this picture for rapport building because it's a unique job. And this picture to me perfectly summarizes what it's like to begin a relationship with an adolescent client. Because you are balancing so many different things. You are balancing having a connection with the parent and building rapport with the parent, but you're also trying to build rapport with this, 14-year-old, um, you know, punk kid potentially that might be coming in. One of my favorite examples of teen interaction, and it was just like such a vivid picture of this process, and I loved it so much. So I had, there was a parent that had, um, two parents that had two daughters, and they wanted both of their teen daughters to be in therapy. And at the time, they had decided that one of their daughters was going to be with me, and the other daughter was going to be with another therapist within our practice. And so, to save time, we scheduled their intake sessions at the same time. And so, all four of us met briefly just to kind of go over a little bit of like the housekeeping things. And then we broke off and kind of met in our pairs. And what I loved about this was when they walked in the door, it was like mom, dad, super professional, super together, dressed to the nines, like, okay, this is a parent. And then the older sister walked in who was seeing another therapist. And like the best description I can give is Rory Gilmore. Like, looked like Rory Gilmore as far as like the way that she dressed, like looked very whatever. Well, then my client comes in, okay? And my client comes in looking like the lead singer of Kiss without white paint on her face. Okay. Like when I tell you this was a hot topic walking, it was amazing. And I loved this so much because it was such a great visual representation of, you know, clean cut parents, Rory Gilmore, older sister, and then just black sheep running. into me. Like I loved it, loved it, loved it. And so, all those dynamics, you have to take those dynamics into account. And while I felt like I had a very good clinical presentation of what was walking in the door by how they looked, it wasn't all that. And it was nice to be able to do that. But how you connect with a teenager who looks like, they're a poster child for Hot Topic, and then connect with parents who, you know, the Stepford parent, the quintessential, um, you know, uh, professional couple, how you connect with both of those individuals and those dynamics is hard. It's tough. Okay. And that's why I say, that therapist that said, oh, I'd work with all teens and kids if it weren't for parents. It's because of things like that. You have to be able to meet them where they're at. And doing that just takes a lot more energy and a lot more effort. So, again, this is kind of continuing how I practice. I allow the teen to decide how the session will go. So when I see them in the waiting room, I'll say, "Hey, I'm Dr. Scott. It's nice to meet both of you guys." And I don't really go by Dr. Scott in my practice. I just go by Jana. So I'll introduce myself. Hey, I'm Jana. This is how this is going to go today. We're going to spend some time where I meet with mom. We're going to spend some times where I meet with just you, and then there's going to be some time that we meet together. I don't care in whatever order that happens. I really like you to choose. And so sometimes the teen will say, yeah, okay, like my mom can come back with me. Sometimes the teen will look at me like that girl did with, death in her eyes and say, well, you can meet with them first. I don't want to meet with them together. Um, and I'll respect that to my best, to as much as I can accommodate that, I will. And that helps me assess for the quality of the relationship between the teen and the parent, who's there and who's not, again, with a grain of salt. But if that child says, I really want my mom to be with me the whole time, okay, that tells me a very different picture than I don't want my parents in there at all. I'm ready to go. Treat me like I'm 18. Like I'm here for me. That'll kind of help me get a picture of where we're at. And then I also introduce therapy dynamics and assess for teen and parent desire for involvement. So there are some parents, helicopter parents, they want to be involved in everything, and I have to kind of pull them back and let them realize, hey, um, you are um, able to loosen the reins here just a minute. And if the parent doesn't want to be involved at all, then I will kind of, give them a little bit of an opportunity to explain why and where that's coming from, and see if that's like they have total trust. I see it both ways. I have a teen right now I've been seeing since they were 12, no, 13, and they just turned 18. And their parent, I've met with them maybe 2 parent consults in the years that I've seen them, and that's clinically appropriate. There isn't anything nefarious there. The parent has their own therapist. They wanted their child to have their own therapist, and they like respect that there needs to be confidentiality there. So they're like, hey, unless there's a major problem or unless you need to break confidentiality and let me loop in on something, I don't want to be involved. I want that to be her thing. I have another person that I see, and their parent is the exact opposite. Hey, well, are we going to check in after every session? No. Well, what are they telling you? Are you going to tell me? Are you going to tell me if they're smoking? Are you going to tell me this? Are you going to tell me that? And that is where I segue into this confidentiality and breaking confidentiality kind of conversation. And I usually do a role play with them. And so what I'll say is, hey, it's very important to me that you feel like you can trust me and that you can discuss things with me. And that's important to me. Okay, mom, it's important to me that she knows that she can talk to me about these things. And so, however, there are certain things that if you tell me, I've got to let mom know that for your safety and for the safety of others. Because when it comes down to it, those are my 2 primary concerns. I want to keep you safe and I want to keep everybody else safe. So if you tell me something that makes me wonder if you're going to stay safe, if you're going to stay alive, that's something that I'm going to have to tell mom. Okay. So if you're having any suicidal thoughts, I have to keep you safe, and we're going to find a way together to have mom brought in on that conversation. Okay. If I find out that you're having any thoughts about hurting somebody else, that's something that I'm going to have to bring mom in on that. Okay. If you tell me that you know of one of your friends has come to you and they've said that they're being abused by somebody, they're a kid. Y'all are teens. I got to keep her safe and I got to keep you safe. That's something that we're going to talk to mom about. Okay. Um, and if there are certain things like that that I have to talk to mom about, I'm never going to do that without your knowledge. All right. So I'm never going to pick up the phone and call your mom after one of these sessions and say, well, let me tell you this. And I'm not going to do that. We're going to talk that out and we're going to do that together. And you're going to be in control of what that looks like. Okay. Now, mom, I know that that sounds scary. I know that that sounds scary because you probably want me to pick up the phone and call you right then. I need you to trust that we're going to work together so that the things that you need to be made aware of, we're going to make you aware of. Okay. And we're going to do it in a way where she still feels like she can tell me these things. Because what I don't want to do, I don't want you to hear me say, oh man, well, that's not something that I can talk to Jana about. If you can't talk about that here, where can you talk about that? And mom, we want her to talk about it in therapy. We don't want her to go to her friends and feel like she can only tell her friends that she's having thoughts of killing herself, right? We want her to tell me those things. So that's kind of how I manage that conversation. Um, and I'll say, and as crazy as it sounds, there are some things that you might tell me that your mom might want to know about, and I'm not going to tell her because at the end of the day, it's not going to kill you, and it's not something that I'm legally required to break confidentiality about. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little quiz. All right, are you ready for a little quiz? This is what I'll say to the teen. And they usually look either super interested or they're super pissed off at me and they already hate me, and that's fine. And I'll admit that. I'll say, hey, you might hate me right now, and that is okay. We're going to get through it. This might annoy you, but it's important that you really understand what you can and what you are allowed to say in here. Okay. I'll say, so what if you tell me that after school yesterday you smoked a cigarette? Based on what I told you before, do you think I'm going to tell mom about that? And if the teen says, yeah, you are, then I'll say, mom, do you think I'm going to tell you about that? And the mom might say, yeah, you better. And I'll say, well, believe it or not, guys, I'm actually not. I'm not going to tell if you talk to me about smoking. I don't like smoking. I don't think it's good for you. But that's not something that could harm you. Now what if you tell me that you're smoking marijuana? Do you think I'm going to tell mom that? Well, no, you just said you're not going to tell her if I smoke. Mom, do you think I'm going to tell you that? Well, I would want to know that or something like that. And I'll say, well, marijuana is different. If you get caught with marijuana, you can go to jail. And while that's not like death, that's still a consequence and that's still something that doesn't keep you safe. And so in that situation, I would love to have a conversation with you deeper about that, about how we could approach that with mom, because that's not really something that you're really I would feel comfortable with. Underage drinking kind of goes into that category for me. That's not like a definite level threat. I gotta call mom right then, but that's something that I want to talk to the kid about the consequences of. Something that has been more of a common question mark is vaping. I know several years ago there was an incident at Oxford High School where several students were hospitalized because their vape was laced with other drugs. And so that is something that honestly, that's one of those things that you got to make a decision for yourself and know your boundary. But that's something that I talk out and I say that in the session. Hey, vaping's kind of weird for me. On one hand, I don't really feel like it's something that I need to talk about if I know that it's just nicotine, but there's a lot of risk there right now. And so I can't tell you how that's going to go. I would probably err on the side if you tell me that. That's something we're going to have to talk to mom about. Okay. So I'm really transparent about the things that I'm firm about and the things that I'm not. And not that I'm giving them an opportunity to convince me otherwise. That's just me being honest. What if do you have social media? Yeah, I love it. Okay, do you have Snapchat? Yeah. What if you tell me that you've been snapping with this person and you told me that this person is 30, that he's over that age? Do you think I'm going to tell mom? And that's an area 100%, guys. I will. That's grooming. And that's again one of these new areas that's not often talked about, but that's something that I'll break confidentiality for. So other areas that I'll kind of quiz them on, cheating on a test. No, I'm not going to tell mom that. If you kiss your boyfriend, no, I'm not going to tell mom that. What are our beliefs about sex and what have y'all talked about that? And a lot of that can come later. I mean, that's a lot to try to get into, but I try to suss those things out. And again, try to get ahead of it so mom's not blindsided. That Well, I just found a vape in her backpack. And did you know about this? Because you were supposed to tell me if she told me that you were vaping. Things like that. It just helps kind of be more in line on the same page. But there are other areas that I've listed at the end of this about some of those role play issues that you could potentially bring up in an intake with both the teen and the parent. So that kind of, before we go on to common fears, that's kind of where I leave it. All the things that I will do from a child um, intake, I will do with them. How are these sessions going to go? How often and how am I going to communicate with your parents? What are the things that I feel like your parent needs to know about? Um, I try to include the teen in any and all parent communication. I really, really try hard. There are some teens that do not want anything to do with that. They will claw the walls if they think they have to sit in a room with their parent and talk about deep stuff. So if that's not something, I'll usually say, like, hey, it sounds like that your mom and dad are being really hard on you about your grades, and they may not understand that you're grieving right now, maybe the loss of a classmate, and they don't understand that it's appropriate for you to be struggling in your classes. Is that something that you would feel comfortable with me contacting them about, and maybe letting them know, hey, there's an area of support here that I want you guys to consider? Or is that something that you don't want me to let them know? And I'll follow their lead on that, and I will actually follow through. I've had a client now for several years who has experienced an eating disorder. And if I'm honest, I don't think that their parents and their home system necessarily is conducive to recovery. Like they're really, really hard about activity and staying fit and things like that. And there have been multiple times when I've wanted to say something to their parents about it, and I've given it to the client and said, hey, I really think that I could help. I think I could say something to them, and they might hear it differently from me than hear it from you. And and their response has been, no, I kind of want to handle it in this way, or no, I don't really want you to do that. And that's okay. Just because I think that I can doesn't mean that I always should. um, so that's kind of how I handle that. And I know we could go in depth about that, and I've already gone way longer than I thought I would on that. And so we'll wrap up with these next little things. So common fears of counselors when you are seeing children and adolescents, and what I want you to think about and reframe in your brain. If you have a fear about this, that's an area for growth and something to process in supervision in the future. Okay, so if you're nervous, parents in general can be scary. Just the thought of dealing with parents can be scary. Blended families, all those different dynamics, divorce, and some of these things can be triggering for you. Who's to say you had great experiences with all these areas? Suicidal and homicidal reporting. That's something that we'll talk about more in depth in a future module. Abuse, oh my gosh, I'm horrified of finding out that one of my child clients has been abused. What do I do? How do I do all of that? That's also something that we'll talk about in a future module. Testifying. What if I get a subpoena? What if they want me to go to court? What am I supposed to say? Um, that is something that does not happen often. Um, but I will say that, yeah, fair point. Be a little bit nervous about it. The key to not being worried about what comes out in court is just being on top of your documentation, documenting everything that you can. I tell parents, hey, I am not trained to decide custody. I am not trained to determine who needs to be with who. I'm here for your child to process all of these things. If you were to call me to court, that's fine, but I'm really not going to be helpful to you. My goal is to be here with your child and with your teen. And honestly, to not use me as a tool to not break that or violate that for your child, I would really, really just, ask that maybe you avoid trying to bring me into anything legal, because I can't really, I can't really offer anything. That might come up if a child were to disclose abuse to you, and in the course of things, you might be called to testify that that happened. A lot of times, you can get your legal representation to reach back out to the judge and ask if you can submit a written statement. And usually, sometimes that will suffice instead of having to actually go. But yeah, fair point. And that again, we could have a whole class on just subpoenas and court orders and testifying, and you'll go more in depth about that in your future ethics course. But in the area of child, you are not an expert witness. You are not an expert witness because you're intimately involved with the child. And so they're going to be asking you questions about your interactions with the kid and what happens in session. And I just don't think that happens as much as you might think. So the other thing that I'll say is be aware of multicultural considerations. Know yourself and know the people that you're working with. Be aware of cultural implications in your client and their family. Are they an immigrant population? Is the child that you're seeing a first generation American? Um, these things matter. Family systems history. Hey, do you have a single dad who's raising their daughter who was raised by a single dad or a single mom? Being aware of these types of things. What do they expect out of family? How were they raised, and how do they expect to be parents of their children? Beliefs of roles of parents and children. Back in, my grandparents' generation and my parents' generation, it was child are to be seen and not be heard, right? Now, I think that's totally turned itself up on its head. Luckily, our society, we honor and value children a lot differently, but that might not necessarily be the case based on their multicultural background. I had a referral sent to me for a 4-year-old little boy who wasn't potty trained, and the school was so worried about developmental milestones. And this 4-year-old, he was Pakistani, and once I met the parents, and I met his mom wasn't worried about it at all because she had not been enforcing him to go on the toilet. Because in that culture, or the way that she described it to me, at least in the culture within their family, I will not speak for all Pakistani people, but in the culture in her family, is that men, even her child as a male, had priority over her opinion as a woman. And so her parenting style, and she was the primary parent, she was really lax with him. And so it wasn't a developmental issue as much as it was, she did not feel comfortable in the role of training him to potty train because it required boundaries and kind of forcing. So just things like that are helpful to break things down. And what a relief, right? Like what a relief to find out that kid does not have a developmental issue, that it really is, kind of what's going on culturally and in parenting. Um, and then also just the beliefs of counseling and mental health counselors. Some, um, cultural populations think that counseling is full of crap. Truthfully, they just don't believe in it. They think, quacks, right? And all those types of things. Other people, they really take it seriously, and they really, it just kind of depends on where people are at. Being aware of those backgrounds and what's walking into the door is going to help be able to assess what's going on, and just how they believe that this is going to work or not. And then also other areas for you to know yourself on of those conversations, maybe to have in that role play of confidentiality with parents. Beliefs on parenting and teen hot topics is huge. So, what are your beliefs on social media usage? How old should they be until they're allowed to have a phone? How old should they be until they're able to have social media profiles? Vaping, smoking, underage drinking, marijuana, drug use, sexting, safe sex practices. What are your beliefs on that? What do you believe the age that children can stay home alone? In this is I laugh because I don't even know what I would do in this situation, and I'm so grateful it didn't happen to me. But I should probably prepare myself for this to happen more. So now that they make those like bougie baby monitors, and I have one, but the bougie baby monitors that connect to your phone, like you can have it on your app. I heard this story of a parent being reported to CPS for neglect because they had told their counselor that they ran around the corner to pick up their 6-year-old child while their 2-year-old was taking a nap. And they didn't want to wake up their child from a nap. And so they turned their baby monitor app on their phone and left the house to go get their older child. And they were just like wanting to process if I thought that was crazy or not. And I was like, I don't know. That's interesting. Like that's an interesting situation. Athletic involvement. What are your beliefs on travel ball and at the age that it's okay for children to participate in organized sports and cross country and travel team, sports that require you to cross country, sorry, or travel across the country. What is your perspective on that? non-suicidal self-injury. So this is huge, because parents, if they see their kid cutting, they think they want to kill themselves, and that is usually not the case. And so I've dropped an article in that folder, that's actually written, one of the contributing authors is one of the professors at Ole Miss. And so that I put an article in there just about a study that was done about, NSSI. But luckily, there's a lot more research and information about that coming out. But these are areas that you need to know yourself, know where you stand on, and maybe dig deeper into some of these areas for yourself so that you're able to have these conversations with parents, so that you're able to have these, positive working relationships with both parents and teens and children. What I will say, this the last piece to think about, is when you are doing, confidentiality comments. My 2 year old, she has no concept of, um, what it means for me to be confidential with her information. My 14-year-old niece 100% knows what it means to be confidential about her information. She does not even want me to mention her boyfriend's name in front of her grandparents because she's so embarrassed by it. And so just knowing that, knowing these developmental differences of how you're able to maintain, you know, and honor where that child, where that teen is at in their development, but then also being able to still do your job ethically and legally. Okay, so I hope this was helpful to you. I apologize for the length of it. I apologize for the, weird interruptions in the middle. Excuse me, but, please look in the folder on Blackboard and let me know if you have any questions, as you try to complete exercise 2.